this message wherever you stand. I'm calling every woman, calling every man. We're the generation, we can't afford to wait. The future started yesterday, and we're already late.
Good morning, Detroit, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Empowered Living. I am your host, Marshall Bryant. Today, Loris Allen is absent due to illness, but he'll be on later for another episode. But today, we are finishing part two of two segments that we have done. One is looking at the parallels of incarceration and immigration. That will be the first segment today. And then we also will be continuing a conversation that we had a few weeks ago about men and their role in the community. So I'm going to start introducing who's going to be on our panel. Today we have Mr. Edward Sanders. We also have Jose Rodriguez. And we also have Adonis Flores. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in today and sharing, first of all, Father's Day, because I know this is an important day for you to share with your own fathers or share with your children. So I want to say thank you for taking the time out to come in and share in this discussion that we're having. So I want to pick right up where we left off when we were talking about the parallels of incarceration and immigration. And I first want to just give you a few seconds to briefly, maybe a couple of seconds, give your view and your purpose and what you do in community when it comes to these two topics and how they tie in together.
The concern about juvenile lifers or children in the criminal adult system and the children of immigrants and how they're being treated in detention centers, the parallel is that in each instance there was no real planning. It was pretty haphazard, where legislators decided to take and prosecute children as adults here in the United States, and in doing so they never considered the many ramifications, and this became evident as the United States Supreme Court began to take and review these cases, that there was no real democratic process where each state legislative bodies consciously made decisions about how the children would be affected in the adult system. I see the same parallel with the recent putting of immigrant children in detention centers. There's no real thought there. We even have the President of the United States making he's exaggerating about, laws have been created for this purpose, and one party versus the other party being responsible, when in fact there was no law created. He just did something as a policy, and it's taking effect, and no one is considering what his short-term or long-term ramifications would be, and that's what I'm seeing.
Okay. Jose?
Yeah, and just to go off of that, we've seen for the first time ever in any administration, we're having children separated from families. This is something very inhumane, and I can't believe this is happening right now. We also see an increase in detentions, not just at the border, but in different states. Many families are being torn apart, and there's even talks from this administration of building more detention facilities, which will just lead to more detentions.
Right. Okay.
I want to emphasize that immigrant detention centers are just jails for immigrants. There's no nicer way to put it, because not only are most of these detention centers run by the same prison companies that run private prisons like the GEO Group or Corrections Corporation of America, and they're profiting off of the immigrants that are in detention, as well as the black and brown youth that get incarcerated through the juvenile system. So it's a very, very deep problem socioeconomically that is profiting a few at the expense of the life of a few.
Right. This is very disheartening, and as you all were saying, just as of this week, just hearing policymakers and people in the government, one quote scripture, trying to find some way to say that it is right, then say that it is a law. That is just, it's unbelievable, because from what I've researched, there has never been a law that said it's okay to separate families. It was not right in the Holocaust when they, did that, and they separated people, and it was based on control and how you were treating people. It was not right in slavery to do that, to take slaves, separate the family, make profit off of them. Now with people at the border, I have a problem. Oh, we'll take your children. Why did you show up? Basically, that's the attitude. Why, if you don't show up and you go away, then you won't get your children taken. So that solves your problem, and that does not. And this is just really, it's inhumane. And I can't believe something like this would even, in this day and age, we are looking at just inhumane behavior. So the last time that we left off, we didn't get a chance to talk about the voice of people that are DACA recipients that do not get a chance to vote in, or those that are in immigration that don't get a chance to vote. So Adonis, we left off, so could you pick up with that, explaining with the people's voice how that gives the opportunity for the unheard to have a chance to have a voice in politics?
Yes. So, like you mentioned, undocumented immigrants and DACA recipients and legal permanent residents, people with different work visas, cannot vote in the elections. Only American citizens can. Only American citizens that are over 18, and only American citizens that are over 18 and registered to vote. Fortunately, here in Michigan, there is no law like Florida, where people that have a felony in the record are not allowed to vote. Once you serve your sentence, I believe you're allowed to vote here in the state of Michigan. But for undocumented immigrants and DACA recipients, we cannot vote because simply we're not American citizens. So one of the programs that we're doing with our organization, Michigan People's Campaign, is we want to encourage immigrants to be part of the People's Voice Caucus, which is going to knock on doors and get voters out to vote. I always tell people an immigrant that takes 50 people to the poll has 50 times more impact in the elections than one single voter. So that's our model. We're trying to get these people that are disenfranchised, that cannot vote, engage in the electoral process by talking to voters, by registering voters, and by making sure that those who are legal permanent residents and qualify for citizenship can apply for citizenship as well, so that our voices get heard, and when our impact in the political system, hopefully on the long term, will allow us to change these policies. And again, these won't change in the short term through politics, but it can help us in the long term. So one other thing I want to urge people that are watching is, in Michigan, the real election is August 7th, especially in Detroit, because our districts are gerrymandered. They're drawn in such a way that they are safely Democrat or safely Republican. So the real election is August 7th, and I want to urge everybody, go out and vote August 7th. Don't forget about the primary election. That's the most important election.
Okay. Now, Jose, can you please give more information on how you work with DACA recipients and also with the People's Voice as well?
Yes, of course. Like Adonis mentioned, DACA recipients can vote. I myself am a DACA recipient, but just because I can vote doesn't mean that I can't have my voice heard. Through organizing and just informing people, I can encourage people, those who can vote, to vote. I think that's one of the most powerful things people in my position can do. Although we can vote, there's still ways that we can, have our voice heard. Doing things like canvassing, even talking to your own family members, making sure that they're educated on what's happening. Those who can vote, encourage them to vote. Doing things like that, I think can be very impactful.
Okay. All right. And I know, Mr. Sanders, you have not had an opportunity yet to connect with the people's with the caucus in with this campaign to elect in the next election that we're getting ready to have. How do you feel with working with juvenile lifers and also touching base with this conversation, the connection as far as like laws or things? How are you feeling about what should occur, especially helping juvenile lifers in the same situation?
With prisoners in general, one of the things that we didn't have while incarcerated was voice. I would ask that families and friends of returning citizens and the returning citizens themselves give a simple party at your home, a simple gathering, whether someone do it on your behalf or you do it, where you call it a voice party, and you have people to come over and you inform them whether you're the family member of the formerly incarcerated person or you are the former incarcerated person, and inform your family and friends when they come to that gathering that this is a voice party. One of the things I didn't have when I was incarcerated was a voice. And so what I'm asking is that you, as family and friends, take and participate in the election to give people like myself and others a voice. So it doesn't have to be no more than 5 or 10 family members, more or less. But if the many people that have come home, if they would do something as simple as that, or the family and friends who have been receiving them as they come home, if we were to do that in our own gatherings, it will multiply. Like Jose say about the number of people is stronger. The 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 is more effective than the one, and it'll work right here. I myself, the same day I got out, I registered to vote. I got a registration. I moved, so I had to make sure that I take and file a paper to acknowledge that I had changed addresses so that my vote don't be canceled. And I also, and those of us who are coming home sometime, our first destination is not the destination that you might be at after you done took and came home. So make sure that you take and correct your present residence, that you file the necessary papers with the Secretary of State or the Department of Human Health and Services, and have that taken care of.
Okay. And that is very important, having a voice in the caucus, because, just historically, when things happen and the accounts that happen or how people are affected, it's important to hear exactly that voice of the people. I mentioned something earlier, and I just want to be clear about it. Of course, we know the Holocaust did not happen here. And I mentioned it because that was a disheartening thing that happened to people and families. And the voice that we have in the account of that is when we teach our children the diary of Anne Frank, and they read that story. They have that child's voice, what that was like, her experience through that diary. And then also at some particular time, you see that family was separated. The father was one place, and that was disheartening. Then you have other accounts historically. So the same thing here, having a voice, even though, it's like with what's happening, and the idea is, like you said, the blame game. It's this party's problem. It's their fault. They did it. But the thing is to hear the actual account and see how can you do this to children that are at the border, but then say, well, if your parents didn't come, then this situation would not happen. And that's like saying, okay, well, if you just go away, the problem goes away. No, if they're here, there's a problem. So historically, just like with incarceration, all these things, let's kind of talk about why is it so important just not to want to hear the voice of people, just to go away. I really want to talk about that, Mr. Saunders, from your experience from incarceration and connecting with other Black and brown people while you were incarcerated. How important is that in the system, just to hear that voice as well, or not to be heard?
It's very important to be heard. Here in Michigan, we most prison facilities had inmate newspapers.
Hmm.
Under John Engler, they removed those. They did away with all the prison newspapers in the state of Michigan, and that took away prisoners' voice. You know, I think the prisoners in one state, and they have a newspaper called the Angola newspaper, and it's one of the most well heard newspapers in the country in terms of prison newspaper. In fact, it competes with some non-prison newspapers, and it's very important to allow prisoners to have a voice, of those that are incarcerated as well as those in society, where we keep society connected to what's going on inside of it. It affects you too.
Yeah.
You are paying more money into corrections than you are into education. So you would want to be informed, and you would like to take and have a balanced conversation, a balanced, hearing about what is going on. You would like to take and have that. You wouldn't want to take and just, have where you get one side, one view of what's going on. And this is exactly what is happening in Michigan, where prisoners had lost the right to take and be able to go into courts and file litigation. They have lost the right to take and have newspapers within inside of the correction facilities. The media is denied substantial access in Michigan prisons. So this takes and cut off the public's perception of what's going on. The perception of what's happening inside of and confinements are limited. And it's important that we have a balance. Like when inmates come out, the public expect, something different than a guy that shows up with a suit and a tie and articulating himself in an intelligent way, because that's not the image they are giving of an incarcerated person. They don't expect the person to come out and start his or her own business. They don't expect the person to come out and be involved in community affairs and concerns. They don't expect them to go to church with them. They don't expect them to go to mosque with them, because they have a concept that these are just criminals and they are beneath us. They're not. They are mothers and fathers. And in the case of the immigrants and the children, we have to remember that the family, the union between a man and a woman, is the most important union in our society. That's the most important institution, is that union between that couple. And they are the most important unit to a child. The child world is based around their parents, okay? Not an institution where, they are just being warehoused. That is the most strange thing to a child. I can understand and relate to that, having been in a reformatory at the age of 17 and 18 and 19 and 20 years. That was the most difficult part of my incarceration. I'm trying to put on my head how children are coping that's much younger than that, being warehoused. And none of them have their parents there.
Right.
And they are wondering what I did wrong. This is going to have a tremendous effect on those children, whether they are in that circumstances for 24 hours or for months.
Right.
And the way it looked like, because they are being used as political pawns. If this was going on in another country, we will be outraged.
Yes.
We'll be in the streets marching and everything. And it seemed like we are not doing that at the present. And we should be. We should be outraged. We should be in the streets. These are children. They can't defend themselves. They don't have a voice of their own. We should be doing more than just simply taking and throwing tomatoes across on the table at the other political parties and just having conversations on talk shows, on television and radio. We should literally be in the streets. These are children. They need to be reunited with their family while this process goes on in terms of determining their status here in this country. They shouldn't be warehoused somewhere away from their parents. The media is being denied access. Even lawmakers, members of Congress, are being denied access to inquire and to get a visual of what's happening. This that's not democratic.
No, it's not.
I don't care who you voted for. You didn't vote for that. Don't allow the fact that you voted for somebody to just take everything in as a way of supporting that person. Support that child. Forget about the person that you voted for and think about the child. Think about your own child. Think about your family members' children
Mm-hmm.
and then assess the matter. Don't assess it from a political angle.
Right. Adonis or Jose, did you want to add anything?
Yeah. Back to like the importance of having a voice, and back when mandatory minimums were implemented, intentions that were clear, and many having mandatory minimums pretty much gave um, judges took away their right to actually, serve justice. It didn't matter the circumstances in which you were arrested or for whatever reason. If any, with mandatory minimums, you were just sent to jail. The intentions were clear. The system just wanted to put people in jail. This led to many communities being silenced.
Mm-hmm.
When having people behind bars didn't allow for proper representation of those populations.
Mm-hmm.
So just looking at that fact, we can see where the importance of having a voice and having voices silenced, how that's affected the country.
Right. Adonis?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of politicians have been very blunt about their intentions for limiting the people's rights ability to vote and have a voice is because they understand that they could lose power. They could lose political power. And this is just part of the new Jim Crow, right? They're in many states like Florida, even after you're released from jail, if you have a felony, you won't be able to vote for the rest of your life. You have to petition the governor,
Mm-hmm.
and the governor is not interested in giving people the right to vote again. So most of the people that petition never get that right back.
Right.
So we cannot allow that to continue happening. That's why we need full citizenship and equal rights for everyone in this country, whether they are formerly incarcerated people, whether they are immigrants. This business of creating a second class of citizens, it's the only person that is benefiting is the multinational corporations, the mega rich, not even the average rich that we think of that has millions of dollars. We're talking about the mega rich that has billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hurting the majority of Americans. It really is hurting 99% of Americans
Mm-hmm.
in order to just profit the 1%. So to a lot of folks out there that one day aspire to be wealthy, they tend to vote as if they were already wealthy and hindering themselves,
Right.
hurting their community and their own loved ones, instead of trying to vote based on the reality that they're not
Mhm.
wealthy and that we need these government programs to better everybody in society. We need public education. We need better schools, better roads, and state institutions that are actually helping people, not this privatized prison
Right.
system that is not rehabilitating anybody. Like I mentioned in last week, we have a record number of prisoners nowhere in the world, and as a result, we have more people in prison now than slaves during slavery, and they're made to work in many of these
Right.
prisons for cents on the dollar. How is that not slavery? That doesn't. There's just no excuse for this. It's immoral, and we need to end it. And that's why we need people. Voting is not enough. Voting is the bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
We need people out there voting, but also we need to exercise our economic power. We need to boycott these banks and companies that we know are profiting off of these incarceration systems.
Right. Yeah. I agree. We do not use our economic power enough. We look at things more from a material standpoint of what like need. And as soon as somebody puts something in our face, we feel we need it, and then we really don't. But if we pull our money back, pull our money together, our resources, start networking, bartering amongst ourselves, we would make a big difference. The thing is, like you were saying with the election, and people in power, people feel they understand, well, if you don't have a voice, if you don't use your voice, then they have the upper hand to make the more decisions, and you are not in any way involved in that, and it's decisions made over you. And then we have people, especially in our communities, urban communities, I have to speak on this because working in the education system, we don't see a lot of parents coming out to parent meetings or things where we need to be networking and organizing, because I believe we get the attitude, well, they're just going to do what they're going to do anyways. It really doesn't matter. And or as if politics is so separate from our lives, when in fact you live politics every day. Somebody is making a decision over you from the time you get up in the morning to the time you lay down, from the time you get in your car. Somebody's made a decision. They've made a decision over, the insurance, over how the potholes are going to be filled, over, even the traffic lights, who's going to, what traffic light is going to be put up and taken down. And then when we're not active in those things and things happen, then we have taken ourselves out of the equation, when we need to realize when people are running, they asked our permission, can they represent us? And we need to take our power back, number one, by thinking in a different way and then getting more actively involved. So we're going to take our first break. I am so glad that we had this opportunity to finish part 2 of this discussion. Of course, gentlemen, you're definitely invited back to continue, because this is not something that we're just going to talk about now because in the news it's in front of our face and everybody's talking about it. We need to see the outcome. We need to see exactly, get involved, who's doing what, and continue these conversations, and also find out how we can stay connected to make a difference. So we're going to take our first commercial break, and we're going to come right back. So please come back and join us for part 2 of our second discussion, which is men actively involved in the community.
If you hear this message, wherever you stand, I'm calling every woman, calling every man.
Detroit history is Black history. Black history is American history. Join Hood Research this Saturday, June 23rd, as we learn about significant contributions by Black people in Detroit. Buses will be loading at 8 a.m. The tour is from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Lunch is included. The cost is only $30. Reserve your seat by calling 1-248-234-2371. Call today.
If you hear this message, wherever you stand, I'm calling every woman, calling every man.
Welcome back, Detroit. My name is Marshall Bryant, and we are beginning part 2 of our second segment, and we're talking about men in the community and their role. This is part 2 of a conversation that we were having a few episodes back, and we talked about men in the community. And of course, our last segment, we were talking about the parallels of incarceration and immigration. And I am just very proud of the gentlemen that have taken the time out on this Father's Day to come in and give their voices and share their perspectives. I do want to say just briefly on the way in, I was meditating in prayer, and I was just thinking, and just emotionally the topic of immigration, and then just understanding mass incarceration, also being an educator, and understanding some of the things that's going on in education, and wanting the best for our students. I was just really thinking like, okay, I just really, my emotions have been so all over the place with so many issues that you just want to just get to the root of and come up with a solution. And on the way, I was listening to a song by Brian Courtney Wilson, Worth Fighting For. And it just really touched me as I was coming in, and it gave me more encouragement, because I said, these are men that feel just like this song said, there's so much more worth fighting for. And that's why they are here, because they're taking an active role in the community with students, engaging with juvenile lifers, working in the incarceration system, DACA, immigration. So I just want to say hats off to you, gentlemen. And I am very excited today that you've taken this time to join us. So we're going to do some reintroduction again. Of course, we have Mr. Edward Saunders. And then we also have Mr. Jose Rodriguez, and we also have Mr. Stephen Dandridge. So I just want to take a few minutes. Mr. Dandridge, you're joining us now. And could you briefly just tell us what you do and how you work with the youth and in the community?
Okay. Well, first of all, my organization is called Excellent Choices LLC, and I do a lot of life skills training with the youth, especially dealing with conflict resolution, critical thinking, which is an area that I feel that they're lacking in the school systems, in the urban communities, urban school systems, and even some financial planning, and just getting them to make better decisions,
Right.
Because they already are set up for failure, and it's up to us all individually and collectively to change that paradigm.
Right. Okay. All right. So we were talking about community. Even with the last conversation we were having, it still involved community. Gentlemen, can we talk about how do we get parents more engaged and getting their children engaged in more community and, like you say, thinking to create thinkers? Because I get what you're saying, because I tell my students all the time before I start today, I'm educating you as thinkers, because I want them to get that in their head. You're not just doing something remotely or repetitiously. You have to be a thinker, even in the system and everything that's happening. You have to be a thinker to get, well, they're saying this, but what is the purpose behind it? So how do we get parents to be more engaged with that, helping that?
That's the million, trillion, zillion dollar question. But definitely, we've got to find a way overall to get them engaged in the future success of their children. And it's been a hard fight to get them to buy into it.
Right.
So, some parents send the kids to school, unfortunately, as a babysitter so that they can get a break, especially if their kids are having some issues. And we talk about it all the time in the school systems and outside the school systems. What can we do? I always say, well, maybe we could feed them, and they'll come in and hear some of this and what we're offering, so that they could become more a part of it. Because if the parents don't become a part of it, it's set up for failure.
Yeah.
The educators, the people in the community like myself, and the parents. It's got to be like a three-tiered or a three-pronged attack,
Right.
To help our kids have an opportunity to be successful. Because the only way that you're going to be successful is, number one, education.
Right.
Number two, we got to learn how to start owning things again, because, that is a thing of the past. And then we got to also make them feel like they are somebody, or they are going to be successful, or their voice needs to be heard, those type of things. And we could go on and on with that, but the parents definitely have to become more involved.
Okay.
It's ironic that it's Father's Day today, which is a good thing.
Right.
But we definitely have to find a way, especially the fathers, to get us front and center more so,
Right.
because society has kind of pushed us, especially in the urban community, to the background, and we're like invisible. And I talk to so many men of color that are integral part of the children's lives, but they don't get any recognition for that.
Right.
Just come on, if with your children, if you have an opportunity to take care of them or be a part of their lives, then you're going to. That's innate in us. So I feel like if we can find out, if or Mr. Sanders, or if Jose knows a way that we can all put our mindsets together and figure out a way to make those parents or the parents more involved, it's going to turn around quickly.
Right.
For our children.
Right. Jose, did you want to interject?
Yeah. But yeah, like you mentioned, that's like the $1 million question, right?
Yes, it is.
But I think one thing that's very important for communities, and speaking from my experience, I was privileged enough to go to college, and oftentimes you see people that graduate college and they leave their cities or communities. I think it's very important if you want to see your community improve, you need to stick around and find ways to lift their voices and just improve your community overall. I've recently been volunteering with Michigan United, where we try to have get parents informed on not just immigration issues, but community issues that affect their kids, their communities. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Not those people that are privileged enough to have careers should try to be those role models to those kids in those communities. And that's something that I've been trying to do, and become that role model for kids in my community.
Okay, Mr. Sanders.
I take and reflect on
Hold the
how
mic up.
we are raised, and oftentimes parents feel that because they have the liberty to take and strike a child and disciplining a child, that is appropriate in terms of educating them, but actually spending time and communicating with them is more effective than actually taking and disciplining them with a scrap or anything. And I would encourage parents to do that. Spend time to communicate with your children. When they're at that young age, their minds are developing different than anyone else, and they do things that are impulsive. They take risks. They're influenced by their peer group, but they can also be influenced by you if you take the time and explain things, as opposed to taking and laying down that rule that we often hear, because I say it so. Well, you need more than that, to take and critically think. It's not just because you say it so, but it's because of these reasons, this understanding. So to take and help, as Mr. Dandridge was pointing out, that we need to take and try to help our children critically think is something that's missing. Particularly in the African American community, where there are so many men are absent. These children, and you recall me and your sister had a very strong conversation in this regard. She was asking me why so many young African American men are taking and following other individuals that are not really, leading them, constructively. And why would you follow somebody, in Aaron?
Right.
You can see there in Aaron. Well, that's the lack of critical thinking. And then there's the male is missing in the community. And a lot of us, we're growing up, and many African American men don't want to admit, but most of us are growing up with our mama's tendencies. And it's very explosive and dangerous between men when men have the tendencies of women. And, we sometimes say that women do things in a way where they're drummer, they're drummer queens. Well, men are drummer queens too. And when we are drummer queens with firearms in our hand, it's not because you're really tough. It's really because you pretty much acting as a woman when you standing behind that gun and firing it off at a person. You're doing something in an emotional way. You're not critically thinking. You're not critically thinking as a man, as an adult, because if you were, you would think of the consequences that would bring. And that's not to take and put women down or anything. We need that feminine sensitivity that women have, but for men to have that, where and they lack the real masculinity. When you're talking to them and they're so offensive, everything you say to them, they're offended by. It's evident that that's mama. That's the feminine side. You too feminine. This is why our churches lack males in the church. The message in the church tend to be a feminine message. It's always about passivity, and that's not to take and put the church down. We want our young men in the church, in the mosque, wherever they go, but we don't want where you go in our house of worship and the only persons that's sitting there in the house of worship is a house full of women. The only way you can get a male in there if they still knee high. But as they grow up, they no longer relate to the message, because the message is one. It goes all the way back to slavery, where we are taking and teaching a message of passivity. We have to take and teach a message that is positive and constructive and that's balanced. We often say that our women in the African American community say they raise their daughters, but they spoil their boys, and it's true. We see it in the streets, the way we resolve our difference. We're not resolving difference as men. We resolve in difference as women. But women, when they shout and they explode without that in their hand, we don't see the destructiveness that we see in the community. But when men are acting like women with a gun in their hand, with some type of weapon in their hand, it looks like a war zone. And this is what our urban areas look like in the absence of men being present. So we have to take and have men involved, and we have to begin to take and, speak to this. And not just this emotional thing.
Right, Mr. Dandridge, you look like you're thinking, right. And you're ready to.
I agree, Mr. Sanders, wholeheartedly. That's a huge part of the problem that's going on in our communities when it comes to the violence and just resolving conflict, because you're going to have conflict. It's two types of conflict: good conflict and bad or destructive conflict. Mm-hmm. Because it's okay to agree to disagree, and those are things that our children are not being taught, said pre-K level or K level, because it starts at that point, taking cuts in front of somebody, going to the restroom, to the lavatory. The kids immediately start wanting to put their hands on each other, or they're playing with toys or clay or whatever in the classrooms, and another child takes the toy or the clay from another kid. So it starts early on. And that's something that has to be, just like they learn in math, learning how to read, learning language arts, learning science, all of those things. They have to start incorporating these kind of skill sets in the school system.
Right.
And unfortunately, the old way of doing it when I was in school, it's not working now. It's not effective, because there's no way, like case in point, I was at Henry Ford High School as a vendor this year, and I'm teaching life skills, but when I asked for their grades at one of the card markets, everybody in my class had an F in math. Now, I'm strong in math, so I started dedicating 1 to 2 days a week working on their math, and they started turning around with their grades. I actually went to their math teachers and got the work assignments for the week and said, look, I'm going to go over some of these practice questions. And another thing I did was, if the kid could come in my class and answer the question after I showed them an example, I gave them $1. Mm-hmm. That's, I might bring 30 singles in there. When they open up the bookstores, all kind of snacks they like to buy anyway, but they bought into it. I caught their attention, gave them some instant gratification. And then they started, at one point, I didn't have to give them $1 any longer, because they were looking forward to trying to figure these questions out. Like, I got you guys. We're going to turn these grades around. There's no way, everybody in my class got an F in math. Yeah. Then a couple of days a week, we're going to do some different kind of life skills teaching here. I'm going to help you guys try to turn this around. You got to be able to add and subtract. You got to be able to count your money. You got to be able to take care of yourself and your household. Those things you need to teach. Don't just F everybody out. At that point, I feel you're not being effective as an educator.
Right.
So, it's just being creative in ways to reach them. That's all. Trying to be creative, because they take things in differently than we do. For sure. This is a social media age, so they're catching it, at 12 or 15 years old, they've assimilated so much information like they're 40 years old. They've been exposed to everything. You can talk to them about anything, because they've been exposed to it, whether you want to believe it or not.
Yeah. And it sounds like, excuse me, intrinsic motivation. Well, what's not happening, the intrinsic motivation in learning is not connecting to the social skills and connecting that, so they're intrinsically motivated within the culture. And thinking of that, my sister, she's a different, a little older than me, and she said, well, look at children during the civil rights era. They were out, she was like, they were going to leaders saying, we see the problem and this is what we want to do. So, and again, that created that responsibility. That created also with male children, where they took more of an active role and understood their community. So, and I get what you're saying. How do we get them back to that, rather than just social media, just, whatever, as long as I got the newest pair of gym shoes or the newest game or whatever. So, and another thing, I was interviewing a gentleman for a literary purpose, and they all said little girls get practice from the time they're little. They're playing with baby dolls. They're learning how to nurture. You're learning how to cook. You got the easy bake ovens and all this other. And I was like, you know what? You're right. We start off, but young men, they are not getting that practice of, it's just, okay, grow up, be a man, don't cry, and you better get it right. And then it's like, okay, see, he's no good. So could you talk about that? Because I'm quite sure as men, you get what I'm saying when you know, you hear that like little girls, they get to practice, the boys, they don't.
Well, that's why we always playing catch up to the young ladies. I remember just looking back on my childhood, we would be out playing football, baseball, basketball, the first sport, track, you know, tag, whatever, and the young ladies would be in the house with the baby dolls, for sure, or learning how to cook, or learning how to sew, or learning how to iron or wash clothes, dishes, things like that. So already you learn how to take care of a household, taking care of one. And, you know, by the time we figured it out, you know, we 10 years behind when it comes to that aspect of family or familial things. And we always playing catch up from there. So that's why they need to instill more life skills training in the schools, because you're in the schools just as much as you are at home. And please don't take this the wrong way. You know, the American history and the world history, I respect all of that. But these kids nowadays don't care about George Washington and what he did in the American Revolution. You know, or they see it differently, where George Washington owned over 1,000 slaves on his plantation. See, they'll come at you like that. So how do you combat that? How do you respond to something like that? You got to keep it real with them. They don't. That's not where their thought level is.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? We got to bring it present with them and figure out a way to set them up so that they'll be successful. Once again, they got to start adding these programs in the schools every semester, every school year, starting from pre-K or kindergarten. You got to start teaching them about how to be able to take care of themselves. All right, you do 13 years of school, maybe some kids go to college, some do not. Case in point, don't even talk about the trade careers. Construction is everywhere. Who do you see? Very few of us, because they're not teaching. When I was in school, they didn't talk about trades, and my dad was a skills tradesman, a millwright. But when I went to school, they was like, go to college, get a degree, and you'll be fine in life. You know what I'm saying? But everybody out here, Little Caesars Arena, a $900 million deal to build Little Caesars Arena. They got fined over $500,000 every month for not having enough minorities working there on the site. And they took that hit because it's already built into their cost.
Wow.
So, you know, that's something we need to expose our children to, in addition to some other things. But for sure, instead of exposing them to, you know, the misogynistic stuff that they get all day, every day, that's subliminally going in here all day, the disrespect of the women, the disrespect of each other, disrespect of yourself. You know, those are things that it's front and center with them all the time.
Right.
You know, so it's the shift is going to be a lengthy marathon type shift. But we got to figure out a way to tap into that.
Okay.
You know, because one day I'm gonna be, you know, 75, 80 years old, and I don't want to be afraid to step out my home because, you know, it's a war zone out there. I know I look at the movie The Purge. I love watching those. I don't want to step out and it's like that. And that's how they portray us in our communities. And it's not like that at this point. So since it's not like that, then let's find a way to push that back the other way. You know, that's, you know, and it's not going to be easy.
Right.
At all. You know, but that's why the parents have to become involved.
Right.
You know, it's much more to it than just making a baby. You know, that's the easy part. Now the grind kicks in from there.
Right.
Right.
Jose, do you see with talking about the youth, talking about males and community, and also getting them motivated with the organizations you're working with, have you all start like reaching out to the schools to start, you know, with that type of skill as far as community mindset? Because the one thing in schools, we're teaching all this stuff, but I look at the grouping. They put the children, they tell us, put them in groups. Well, when I put them in groups, the one thing that clicked in my head is this is a community. So if we're sharing ideas and we're supposed to be working together in a group and they don't understand, like one group, they were just falling to pieces. And I said, well, wait a minute, if you were in your neighborhood and you were falling to pieces, what would happen? They were like, well, our community would be a mess, our neighborhoods. So how do we bring that into the school? Because we're pushing the books, but we're not pushing community in the schools too. So what do you?
Correct. Yes. I've been volunteering at my high school, and we've been speaking specifically to kids who are in night school. You know, these kids are behind in school and they have to go to school and during the night just to catch up to you know, be able to graduate in time. And oftentimes I feel, at least when I was in high school, a lot of those extracurricular activities or you know, just weren't offered. I remember, you know, music was very was an outlet for me, and when I was in high school, our music program was cut, and I think cutting those things and not allowing children to you know, pick up activities that they enjoy doing and just they can use as outlets is just, you know, making it more difficult on them. But I think just looking at the education system, it's kind of failed them throughout the years. At least I've seen it happen to me personally. You know, investing in maybe these you know, like BOTEC programs, you know, that could teach our kids you know, trade like trade school jobs, which that, you know, can prepare them to for adulthood. You know, you graduate high school, and if you don't have any skills, it's very difficult and daunting to try to you know, adjust to adulthood.
Right. Okay. So we only have a few minutes left. Mr. Sanders, did you want to add anything before we close out in regards to, you know, what we're talking about now?
All I can take and add to it is we have to take and spend more time with the children, particularly the male. As Mr. Dandridge said, we are always playing catch up with the girls because they are growing up and emulating the role of a mother, of a woman, and the boy is missing out on that. Maybe some of it is due to the fact that boys have a different type of energy than girls. You know, if you've been around a male child versus the female child, they're a little bit more bounce, you know, and sometimes people want to open the door and just let them out. And the woman, she's at home, and maybe while she's at home, there are more women, even though the roles are changing now. Traditionally, the woman was at home, and she had more time to take and allow the girl to emulate her, you know, because this was part of her trade. This is her vocation. This is her place. Her workplace was at home. And so she had the time to take it not only to do her job, but to allow the girl to take and emulate her where the man was out. And so it was like the idea is, well, daddy will get with you when he come home. Well, in some cases, daddy isn't home.
Right.
You know, he isn't there. He's absent. So they have to be receptive to allowing other males to take and play that role, you know, in the community, in the school, in the church, in the mosque, etc. And, you know, we have to take and be receptive to that. You know, there was a time when people in the community used to take in what we call community parenting, that village thing.
Yeah.
And we done kind of got away from that. You know, we need to take and return back to that. We have did an excellent job as African Americans to begin to educate ourselves in terms of our history. I think one of the things we need to take and start putting stress on is not just simply knowing past history, but to begin to take and start identifying cultural practices that we want to implement in our home and in our community. The church, the mosque, and civic organizations, we need to start taking and organizing events and discussing as a community some cultural practices that as a community we want to start instituting, you know, and everybody try to get on the same page or some similar page. We're not going to always have the identical expression because of difference in our religious and expression and so forth, but there is some ground that we can take and find and do on something common.
Okay. And I want to, we're coming to a close, and I just want to say thank you, gentlemen, for coming in and sharing your Father's Day.
Thank you.
I know, you know, everybody might not be a father on the panel, but being just a male in general, taking this time to give your voice. Like we're saying, that voice has to be heard. And that's what this show is about, giving a voice for those that you don't often hear. And that clears up any misconceptions, that also gives new perceptions, and it also gives, you know, that community coming together. So I want to thank you for taking the time and your role in manhood, sharing with Empowered Living, sharing with the community. And I just want to say, Detroit, happy Father's Day to all the fathers. And we hope to see you again next time on Empowered Living.
If you hear this message, wherever you stand, I'm calling every woman, calling every man. We're the generation we can't afford to wait. The future started yesterday, and we're already late. We believe